introduce you to Diego Huezo. Diego has done it all for the seminar. He's a seminar alumni. He's one of your seminar family alumni. He's been a seminar instructor. He's been a seminar administrator. So he's done it all for the seminar. He is currently Boston Mayor Michelle Wu's Deputy Director of State Relations for her Intergovernmental Relations Department. And before that, his most immediate past position was he worked as a in the Government Affairs Department for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. And I'll let Diego explain what MAPC is and the job that he does and some of the different aspects of government agencies as it relates to the decision-making process as well as local government. So Diego, thank you so much for taking time to do this, even with your two little ones. So you can relate to a lot of the members of the class. Folks are with their families and their kids, and so Diego, thank you for taking the time in the middle of your busy schedule and with your cold. So I'm gonna hop off for a couple of minutes and take my break, and I'll be right back. So,
thanks, Leverett. And not too yet. I have a little girl, and the baby coming in July. So hopefully not on the call, not on this meeting. Do I get the call from my wife if you went to the hospital? But I appreciate that. It's good to see everybody. Again, my name is Diego Huezo. I use the He series. So I don't want this presentation to be boring. I want it to be helpful, informative, and engaging. So I think Joel, when he presents, usually he says to unmute yourself, feel free to use the chat and all that stuff. And I definitely encourage that. Like, don't feel like you have to wait till after the presentation for questions. Like, as they come up, feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, use the chat, whatever. In the meantime, it would be helpful if you could just in the chat, just like put your name and just what your affiliation is. It'll help me a little bit later on when we're doing some of the examples. So a little bit about myself, like who's this person talking to me about government agencies and whatnot. So I always say like the two main reasons, there's two main reasons or questions that I asked myself as a kid that helped me kind of shape my interest in politics and in government. The first is that my parents are originally from El Salvador, which is a small country in Central America. They came here as undocumented immigrants in 1989, which is in the height of the civil war that happened in El Salvador. And so, as a kid, the question I had was like, why did my parents had to leave their hometown, their home countries, to come to this country to start a better life for themselves and their family? And obviously, like, as you get older, you understand, you learn more about like all the implications that happened leading to like global politics, domestic politics in El Salvador, and then just kind of those are like the main things. And so that was like one big reason why I've always kind of wondered why I always like interested in government and the role that government policy has on people's lives. The second is so my parents moved to Boston. I didn't go to Boston Public School Systems. I was part of the MECO program. For those that aren't familiar with MECO, it's a busing program that takes kids from the inner cities of Boston and buses them out to more affluent communities with a better education system. And so the second question I always had as a kid growing up was like, why do all the kids of color have to go on a bus to an all-white neighborhood to get an education? Again, you don't think about it in those terms when you're 5, 6 years old, but we did. Like, for like those that don't know MECO, like I'm an early riser because ever since I was little, I'd have to be up by 6 to get ready to catch my bus at 6:45 to take a 40-minute ride out to school to get there earlier than other kids when the school started, right? And so again, like as I got older, you start learning more about like the busing crisis in Boston, segregation, housing policy, the way school and education are funded here in Massachusetts. And so those two questions as a kid, and obviously like again as you grow up, I learned and got really more interested in like how decisions got made, how policies got implemented, who was involved, who wasn't, and just kind of like that always like really fascinated me. So after Needham, I went to Boston University, and afterwards I knew I wanted to do something in like government. And one of the things I'll stress more than anything in this presentation is actually about relationships. And so through good networking, I was connected to somebody that was working on a mayoral campaign in Boston in 2013. I jumped in the campaign. It was like 3-4 months of just like absolute, like just like pizza and donuts and campaigning. Like that's it. We lost, so that that made all that summer even more not painful, but like vivid, if you will. But through that campaign, I ended up meeting some people that, when I was looking for a job, helped connect me to Governor Patrick's office. And so I was, really humbled to be offered an opportunity doing constituent services for Governor Patrick. And that was awesome for me at the time, just like learning like what people call, and just learning about like government in terms of like, this is something the state does, this is something the feds do, there's something, you know what I mean? Just kind of understanding who does what in government. Governor Patrick ended up not running for re-election. So again, I was out of a job. But again, through good networking and people that I'd already met, I got connected to some folks that were running the Boston 2024 Olympic bid back in 2015. So the basic organization was trying to bring the Olympics to Boston in 2024, which I can't believe is going to be next year. For anybody that was around or followed that issue, that campaign really, really went down in the flame. So again, at this point, I was out of a job, and I was like, I swear I'm cursed. And I'm not going to say it again, but I will. Like, I ended up working for Senator Markey here in Boston, doing like district related work. And so helping staff the senator at different events, talking with different stakeholders around policies, constituent services, event planning, advancing, like kind of a jack of all trades, if you will. And so then after that, I knew I wanted to kind of go back to state government. That's kind of where to me, like, it's like Goldilocks. It's like the right amount of macro level with enough local input that it like feels more attainable. So I ended up working for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is the regional planning agency of Greater Boston. If anybody knows anything about government in other parts of the country, most other states have what's known as a county government. And there's like an actual structure and funding for county government. Here in Massachusetts, we have counties, but it's really just in like a border. There's nothing structural really about it. But so that's where I really learned about like state agencies and kind of some of the stuff I'm gonna get into a little later in terms of like the role that they play, because I think they play a really important role, because like not a lot of the advocacy you've heard is really targeted towards elected officials, which I'm not saying is not important. It definitely is. But this is like another, like state agencies is another piece that I think, especially this class, would be helpful just to know. And then, I was at MAPC for a bit, worked there during COVID. And then when Mayor Wu won the election, I was like really, really humble when she was building her team, and I got asked to like join to do state relations, which is what I've been doing since January of last year. So that's where I am. But I was once in your shoes doing Commonwealth seminar back in 2015. And the one story I always bring up in terms of relationships is try to just kind of connect with your class now. Don't be shy about reaching out to other seminar colleagues, including myself, in some of your advocacy work going forward. I've been in several meetings, and one particularly comes in mind when I was at MAPC. I was going to meet with the state senator around, I think it was a bill or a project that I knew was going to be controversial, and I think the senator had already indicated not like being unsupportive of it. So, like you kind of go in with that expectation, that tension, and then the staffer that walks out is the senator's chief of staff, who was somebody that I did the seminar with, I have a relationship with, and that immediately like calmed down the tension of the meeting, right? And it was a way more productive, constructive meeting than I would have anticipated if it weren't for like relationships, And so I bring that up just for you to kind of, make sure to just reach out to your seminar colleagues, because you never know when those connections might come in handy or just might be helpful in your own work. All right. Any questions so far? Cool. So I'm gonna try to go through this a little quick because I do want to get to some of your questions. So I think in your first, I think when Joel presented, he, kind of described like King George and the division of power in government. So this is a reminder of what division of government looks like. You have Congress, which is the legislative branch. You have the president, and you have Supreme Court. This is the same structure that is in place here in Massachusetts. The difference is, I jumped the gun a little bit, but the difference is, the legislature is not called Congress, it's called the State House, and it's the House of Representatives and the State Senate. Your executive branch is Governor Healy at the moment. And then instead of the Supreme Court, we have the Supreme Judicial Court, and that's what it is in Massachusetts. But it's this same, kind of structure. And so, excuse me. And so, a lot of kind of what you've heard so far talks specifically around the legislative process, the budget process, reaching out to your state senator, your state rep, your governor, or whoever it might be. And so I really want to focus today around the cabinet, which is what I'm using as like the state agencies, because that's what they all have. So like for example, you know, at the state level, you have, I forget the top of my head how many secretaries there are, but like Governor Haley just created a new Secretary of Housing. That's what's called part of the cabinet, right? And so cabinet members or secretaries are like the heads of each departments that are focused on certain things. So the Secretary of Housing focuses on housing related policy and just projects. The Secretary of Economic Development, self-explanatory, veteran services, safety, public safety and security, transportation, you know what I mean? So for anybody that loves Pixar, this is the Child Detection Agency. It's from Monsters Inc., which is one of my favorite Pixar movies. And, I think I want to make sure that like you just think like whenever you're doing your respective advocacy in your organizations, of course you reach out to the state senators, and when you're doing that power mapping, just to remember to include something around state agency engagement. And the reason I say that is because everybody pays attention to the governor, as they should, but there's like a whole other department that's in charge of, I'm just going to choose like the environment for the moment, right? Everybody focuses on the secretariat that does the work, but like the people that are doing trout stocking, so when they put fish in the pond, is like the really local specialized cabinet, like state agency people, right? The people that are in charge of like snowplow on the highway, right? Like those aren't the people that you're engaging, but like whenever you're instituting a policy, it trickles all the way down to the person that's in charge of kind of implementing the program, right? And so whether it's like administrating parks, public health programs like we saw during COVID, like I said, snow removal, regulation, security, all these things fall under different buckets, right? And there's like a structure and a hierarchy to that you should kind of treat like they are legislators, right? I'm just going through my notes. Because like I said earlier, like each department has their own respective expertise on things, right? And so if you're focused on, child welfare, it's important that you know the structure of the agency that's in charge of that topic, right? Same thing for public health or for education. So, one of the points, just kind of backtracking even a little bit on engaging agencies, is I think it's really easy. No, it's not true. It's not always easy, but if people are unsatisfied with an elected official, there are, when you vote, that's a way for you to express your opinion and to oust that person if you don't approve of them, right? Agencies are like in this weird place where like if a new governor comes into place, like of course at the high level, most likely they'll be replaced with people, but the lower level is usually a little harder to move around. I'm not saying it should be easy. I'm just saying like there's a lot of holdovers and carryovers, right? And the reason I bring that up is not because like I think that should be reformed or anything like that, but the reason I bring that up is that state agencies as well, like are because like I said, they're like the implementers of the instruments of the policy change. They have also been complicit in reinforcing or implementing intentionally or not these discriminatory practices that we've seen over time, whether that's segregation policy, whatever kind of discrimination you want to think about that comes to mind, like land removal of indigenous people, discrimination of different immigrant populations, right? And just like kind of remember that, right? It's not just the elected official that you should be thinking about when you talk about like when you think about like change and social change. It's also the institutions that are behind the scenes doing the actual work. So in terms of like why you should care, so you guys have done this mass budget policy at this point, right? Okay. So I know Mass budget starts with their their budget starts in January. Just true. But there's like 3 months before, starting in October to November and December, when the governor, before she presents her budget, is talking to her team about um like what to fund, like what levels to fund different projects. So when I was at MAPC, there was a line item that we used to support around youth violence prevention. It's called the Shannon Grant. And so, of course, in January we pay close attention to what the governor comes out, but in October we would request a meeting with the Secretary of Public Safety, which is where this program lives under, to meet with them and their staff, just as like, hey, I know you're thinking about your funding levels for the next year. Respectfully, like this is what our organization believes the funding level should be at. Last year you funded at 11 million. This year, please fund it at 12 million. And it's important to just kind of just get ahead of the curve, right? Because by the time you're reaching out to the legislatures in February and March, these decisions have kind of already started happening. And you want to, as much as you can, like try to like get ahead of the curve and just kind of set the tone and narrative of what the advocacy around what your stakeholders are asking for. Um, so like again, October might be a little too early, but like November, December, again, finding out like who on and I'm sorry, I haven't had the chat open, but like what's one topic area one of you are focusing on?
We haven't broken down into those task force breakout rooms yet, so we
No, no,
haven't.
I know, but like your affiliation, like
Actually, yeah, just shout it out in terms of like, especially Western Mass folk, Dress for Success. What do you
Yeah,
also?
we serve underserved women and non-binary people that are seeking to. We are seeking to help them level the economic playing field.
okay. So without knowing too much about like the specific programs, I'm just assuming it's economic development. So like you'd want to like do your own research and see like okay, Secretary Yvonne Howe, currently she's leading the economic development team. Within that secretariat, like which division or department is in charge of the work that I'm doing, right? Is it the Department of Workforce Development or whatever it might be, right? Let's assume there's one that works on this kind of workforce development, and then just like figuring out like okay, who's the political liaison or legislative affairs person or the program manager for all that matters, and just like request a meeting with them. And like the same things that you've learned in terms of lobbying a legislator, you want to use to lobby a secretary of housing or secretary of economic development and the legislative staff, right? You don't just go to the top. You gotta make sure you treat the staff with the same amount of respect and attention to detail because they're the ones that are going to be advising the secretary anyways, right? Um, so that's one is like you want to kind of get ahead of the curve when it comes to like recommendations of the budget. And then like I said earlier, so Janet, like this program gets passed, somebody has to implement it, right? One of the things that happens right before a bill is going to get signed is like the House and Senate, whoever their counsel or point person of the bill is, will call the secretary or the state agency that's in charge of implementing it and saying, "Hey, I think we're a go on this. What are your last minute thoughts?" It's 12:50. It's like 11:59 before the last day of session. What do you think? And if you haven't engaged that person or you're on bad terms with them, you can probably assume what they're going to say about it, right? And so, again, I bring that up not to kind of scare anybody or to dissuade anybody from doing this, but like if you can cultivate those relationships, so by the time, and kind of, keeping people updated the way you would a legislator, so that like by the time things happen, it's not a surprise to anybody. It's not the first time they're hearing about it. They're informed. They, like an example I have is this happened to me when we were, I was when I was at MAPC, I was at MAPC. We were working on an Airbnb short-term rental legislation. The bill like during didn't move during a formal session, and so during the last like it was December after the Christmas, before the total end of the legislative session, they were going to move the bill, and so they called us and were like, "Hey, we are thinking about doing X. What are your thoughts?" I wouldn't have gotten those calls. We wouldn't have gotten those calls if we didn't have a good relationship with the legislature and like ongoing, right? And the fact that like that happened, and there's another example where an economic development bill was getting passed. And last minute, they had some question around some arts and cultural thing that we were working on. Again, similarly, got a call like, "Hey, like, what are your thoughts on this?" Right? And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because like it happens, and I don't want you all to like when you're doing advocacy to kind of think that like you have to be some like mega insider, blah blah blah. Like all of you are all really smart and really smart people that know your issue area really well, and because you know your issue area really well, when people have questions about things, if you are seen as a resource and known to be on top of stuff, they will call you because they don't want to mess it up, right? But bringing it back to like just the process, like this is what happens at the end of the process. So like it's like if it's like if you're planning a party with your family, right? And then last minute your mom's like, "Oh, can you go pick up the cake?" You're like, I thought I was in charge of picking up my sister, right?" Like it's things like that. That's not the best analogy, but if you will, like nobody likes surprises, no one likes being told what to do. And ultimately, like if you're gonna pass a bill that's gonna affect a state agency, you also want to make sure that like you're getting the best possible bill that you can so that it's effective, it's feasible and all that stuff. And I'll stop there before I get into the next part because I know I've thrown a lot at everyone. Any questions so far?
So say if I want to do like based on education, is there like a specific person I would have to like reach out or get to know and get a relationship with them with?
Yeah, and so the Department of Education is a good example where like they have this the general secretary is the secretary Tutwiler, I forget his first name, and it's the Department of Education. Within Department of Education, there's Department of Higher Education, which is, you know, universities, colleges. There's DESE, which is the Department of Early Education and Secondary Education. And then within those two departments, there's like subcategories, right? Where there's like curriculum based or student based or teacher based, or you know what I mean? And so depending on like what category you have, and let me see if I can put this in the chat. 1 second. Depending on like what specifically you want to, I'll find this. I'll find it in a second. Depending on like what specific work you do, like there'll be somebody. There'll be a point person, and so yeah, I'd recommend. I would recommend just figuring out who that person is and just saying like, "Hey, I'm so and so. I work on X. Would love to just kind of introduce ourselves and our work and figure out ways to collaborate." And then from there, you have the right contact information going forward when you start doing some of this work.
So the way I would go first is if by like email or like contacting their secretary or something like.
Yeah, so I think it depends on what you want to do. If it's like legislative stuff, usually you can ask for like the legislative affairs person. If it's programmatic based, ask for the person that's in charge of this kind of program. But don't also feel like you need to know what to ask for, like as in like whatever it is you want to do, I'm calling because I want to work with you on X. They will figure out who the right person for that is. You know, if you know specifically what you want to do, like I want to talk to somebody about legislation that we're thinking about, then ask for the legislative affairs person. If you want to talk about specific program, programmatic. But like, does that make sense? Like let them do some of the, let them figure out who to, you know, connect you with. Like sometimes it's like the community affairs person, but it really depends on the situation.
All right, that's awesome.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If you are trying to do something and it entails different, like, so it needs, you probably need transportation and say the registry, are all those together? And then like, so what I'm talking about is like mental health does not get a play card, mental health, and disability for mental health. You don't get a play card, but when you really look at it, somebody has a serious issue about parking in a certain area, that's one of their disabilities. They're not entitled to a play card. That's never happened. It's only been for physical disabilities. So would you go to more than one person or, you know, one entity?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good example. And you're right. Like, you know, there are some topic areas that are very specific, like very siloed, but you're right. There are a lot of examples where it's not just one topic. And so, yeah, like in that case, I think it makes sense to talk to the Department of Mental Health as well as the RMV.
Okay.
Honestly, like your your city or town where you live is to be another important stakeholder. Obviously, it depends like what you want to do with it. If it's a state
Mhm.
level thing, um, or is it like a parking regulation need to fix? Which if it's parking regulations, usually it's like your city or town that's in charge of that. But regardless, like nonetheless, you're right that like in some cases you have to reach out to different stakeholders, and that's totally fine. That's yeah,
Okay.
we don't live in a siloed world, so
Thank you.
all right. So again, why should I care about state agencies? Agencies are obviously like bucketed by topic areas for a reason. The governor appoints person A because the person A is an expert on that topic, right? And so, um, just kind of remember that when you're doing some of your like initial outreach, like they are seen as a resource and expertise for the governor, and so you want to make sure that you're also a resource for people, so that when they get some question around, placards and mental health, like they're like, oh, I just talked to Kim, like let me call her and kind of see what she thinks about this, right? Um, and again, just kind of reiterating that like they are a form of they are also public employees and government officials, and so therefore like you shouldn't be um embarrassed or shy about reaching out to them to help with things that you're doing. Like they're not elected officials per se, but they are still representatives of the government. um so
I
again,
just,
I covered. So we have a question.
well, I just wanted to add too that in doing research, because I'm originally from the Boston area, so Western Mass is new to me. I've called places and just said, look, I may not be calling the right place, but this is what I'm looking for. And it is amazing the chain of information that you can get rolling once you just start talking to people.
Right, right.
It's
Yeah,
it's
and
all about not being afraid.
yeah, and I think just like so much of, I feel like life, but that sounds way too corny. But like so much of the government affairs is just showing up, right? Like just being in the room, building relationships, and that's harder to do if you're on Zoom, which I know we're not right now, but like you know what I mean? Like whatever events it is, like just kind of be there and be a resource. So I mentioned these are just some tips. I mentioned some of them already, but like these agencies can similarly like be gatekeepers for things, and sometimes you have a good relationship with some of the state agencies, like legislators will give you a heads up and say like, hey, our department's coming out with this new regulation tomorrow. Like before we finalize the draft, can your organization take a look at it and see what we're missing? Or there's going to be an announcement tomorrow. We'd love to have your boss or you come and attend, right? Things like that. So it's always nice just to kind of, again, just add the respective state agency to your Rolodex. Again, like in the fall is when budgets really start being shaped. So don't wait till January to have those initial conversations. Um, um, and some of this stuff is like similar to what Charles had said in terms of like, you invite legislators to your organization's annual events or to your organization's ribbon cutting. Like don't forget to invite the state agency that's in charge, that like helped you with that grant funding or whatever it might be, right? Like similarly, like invite the agency staff or the secretariat to your legislative breakfast or your lobby day or your annual gala, whatever it might be. Like I think it's just like a nice routine, just kind of add them to everything else. And then really just build that relationship, similar to like legislators. All right, so I think this is like the last piece, and I want to make sure you have time for questions. So I just really quickly in terms of like ways to kind of get involved. Um, Government right now, unfortunately, I feel like people are so mistrusted by it, which really sucks. But the positive side of it is there's a lot of people that are afraid to be part of it, and therefore it means there's a lot of people looking for good people to be part of government, if that makes sense. And so, I live in the city of Boston. I work for the mayor. There are a ton of boards and commissions that we're trying to fill. Boston is not the only city, the only municipality in the state that's looking for similar stuff. So like, if you have time and you want to get more involved, like start with your local, like your town or your city, and just kind of see like what boards and commissions are available, and you know, like similarly, like reach out to somebody and say like, hey, I want to learn more about what this entails, and if it's of interest to you, like get involved. There's like there's just so much opportunity for just good people and diverse people to you know, get involved. And you know, like all politics are local is, you know, kind of what I think Tip O'Neill and I think Joel brings up all the time. So for example, the current lieutenant governor used to be a mayor who used to be like a city councilor and is now the lieutenant governor, you know, of the country. There was a city at large city councilor that I once met who now is running the city of Boston, and you know, like you go on and on, right? Like Secretary Walsh was a state rep before he was mayor, and now he's secretary. Now he's leading the NHL, and I say that as in like I think a lot of times we get, you know, we like make celebrities of elected officials of where they are now, but like we all have friends that have been involved in some way or can become friends with people that like started off as a city councilor that then got elected to mayor that then got elected to this and that. And you know, like if you are a local person, if you just get to know like where you live, like that will help you down the road as well. And there's just like similarly like Charlie Baker, when before he was governor, he was a select board member in Swampscott, which is like, no offense, but like it's a select board member in Swampscott, right? And I say that just to kind of make it so that you know it's not something that's unattainable, right? So don't overlook some of the local stuff you're working on. And honestly, just like get involved. Like I'm one of those people that like there are several days where I'm just like totally overwhelmed with all of the problems in the world and like how slow things happen and change. But one of the things that I try to keep in mind and I honestly believe in is just like you got to start somewhere, right? So if animal welfare is like all you care about or have time to care about, that's great. Like become an expert on that. If it's, you know, mobility access, focus on that. You know what I mean? If you have more bandwidth to do other stuff, then great. But like just start somewhere. Like you don't feel like you have to tackle every single problem all at once. So I'll stop there. I do want to make sure that like I, you know, hear like whatever questions you may have or you know, whatever it might be. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Diego. That was fantastic. And I mean, and you echoed a lot of the key points that Joel and you know we've been hearing, and we'll hear again. You know, you referenced Charles. They haven't met Charles yet. Charles is coming a bit later on in the session. But you know, these are themes that you'll hear over and over and over again. Sort of relationship building those relationships little bit by little bit. You know, credibility, treating staff as if they're legislators, just respect. So yeah, thank you for echoing those and using those in the context of agencies. So do folks have questions for Diego? I know we asked questions during the course of the discussion, but do folks have anything to add to that? Really?
Diego is doing big things over there.
That's right. That's right. Yes,
That's very nice, but it takes a village, and Leverett has been incredibly helpful professionally too. So don't, you know, I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people before me.
And just to add a little bit, thank you for representing El Salvador. I know that our country is you're either into politics to make money or you hate politics because it damages you too much. So the fact that you are trying to make a change, it takes a whole new understanding of what we're trying to do here. So
yeah, public service does not pay private sector money. Let's put it that way. But that's not why we're in the work. So thank you.
Okay. Any questions from anybody? Anything to add?
I think
If not,
Darian.
Oh, do we have a hand up? Yep, Darian. Okay. Oh, you're saying no?
I think Janet unmuted.
Actually, Diego, I'm overwhelmed with all the information that you gave us.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. No, this is great because I've written and I can sort of read it. But I want to thank you because I don't know about the rest of my DFSWM sisters here in this class, but this opens up a whole new world to us at the state level. That and as I'm reading this and I did not miss the reminders about relationship building. They kept popping up in the chat, and this is something we can do
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
affect change.
yeah, and like, you know, I didn't not to overwhelm you more, but like these are the same way you would like approach a state agency. It's kind of similar to like another like a for-profit organization, right? Like these are also big institutions that are also huge actors in the field, right? And so you know, a lot of these skill sets really is just a matter of process, discipline, and relationships, and like those three things to me like will take you far. Like you can replicate the same thing in all these different institutes, whether it's a legislator, a state agency, you know, in a company or whatever. So especially for an organization like Dress for Success, like I imagine there's a lot of for-profit companies that would be interested in getting involved in some way, and it's just a matter of your advocacy skills and your data.